comments until the presentation is over, and then you can put them in the chat. And then we'll have a brief activity where you can share your ideas with us, and we can begin to brainstorm how we hope to work together going forward to a broader, more interdisciplinary, more impactful initiative. The speakers today will be Professor Ron Schiffman, Professor Emeritus at Pratt Institute CPE. His bio is about 50 pages long, but we have an abbreviated version that's going to go in the chat. It spans from participatory planning to community resilience to social justice work, anti-poverty work, organizing the architecture and design and planning professions, and so on. And as you will see by when he speaks, he carries all of that knowledge with him and brings it forward in a way that really elevates communities. And it's a pleasure to have him as a colleague. Same for Geeta Nandan, who is a visiting associate professor at GCPE and co-founder and partner of the design firm Thread Collective, also co-founder of Ready Center, which you'll hear about more in a little bit. And Zara Kuz, adjunct professor at Pratt Institute School of Architecture undergraduate architecture program, and also founder of Oasis Design Lab. And finally, there's me. As I said, I am the academic coordinator of the SES program in GCPE, and I'll be helping facilitate the workshop, which follows the speakers. So without further ado, I will leave you to Ron, and he will take over from now and discuss RAMP.
Okay. Thanks, Lionel, and thanks for that introduction. And I welcome all the students who are participating in this event. Many of you probably are too young to remember, but on October 29th, 2012, New York City and the whole metropolitan region was hit by a tremendous storm. It really was a superstorm, not really a hurricane, but it directly impacted a great number of neighborhoods that along the water's edge as well as inland. You see different communities in the metropolitan area that where the entire waterfront was disrupted dramatically. Next slide. And one of the things that occurred is that a number of students at Pratt started immediately to see how they could bring blankets and food to some of the communities that were isolated because of the storm. Some of those communities were in the Rockaways, some in the Lower East Side, some of them out on Long Island and New Jersey. But while we were actually sitting in the room 406 talking about how we can deliver some of these food and blankets to people, some of the students suggested that perhaps we should focus our semester on how we really address climate change. And so there was some discussion about that. And then others like Deborah Gans were working with the Office of Emergency Management, Deborah being an undergraduate, and a number of other faculty members got together with the students, and out of that came this idea to really focus our educational opportunities that semester on how we could provide assistance to the communities that were impacted, particularly the communities of low and moderate income that were affected disproportionately because storms don't discriminate, but the capability and the services in low-income communities are the result of discrimination and discriminatory patterns for long periods of time. So out of that came this idea for RAMP, a Recovery Adaptation and Mitigation Planning program. How do we really help communities recover? How do we get them to adapt and become more resilient in the face of climate change? And how do we really mitigate future concentrations of greenhouse gases? But we also realized that it was critically important to build the capacity of local groups and go beyond the idea of where you were. And a lot of these communities were discriminated against for some years, didn't have the capacity to resist or adapt to the changes that were occurring to them, and they needed more help than others. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So what occurred was a series of initiatives, and there were three basic phases. One was, how do we take all the planning studios and the graduate and undergraduate programs and focus them on the various different neighborhoods throughout the city? And Red Hook, the Lower East Side, Coney Island, the Rockaways, and Red Hook were all focused on that first semester, that first year from late 2013 through to the following year. We also not only were able to get graduate architects and graduate urban planners working on this, but attracted through the leadership of Deb Gans and a couple of others on the faculty there, but also attracted the attention of people in the art school in industrial design and interior design, and primarily in community design. And all of those began working in one way or another with us in these efforts. But in addition to working on the planning studios, we were working with community-based organizations throughout the city. In each of the communities that we were working in, there were environmental justice groups or community-based housing organizations that allied with us. And a number of issues arose, and as a result of that, we worked with them to develop a series of workshops. One of them was what we called the Hurry Plan, and it was a way of working with the National Design and Prevention Center out of Hawaii to train local groups in how to respond to hurricanes and how to respond to these kinds of disastrous events. Other of people who were willing to feel the long-term impact of climate change. Not only did the storm affect them, but they didn't have heat for weeks and weeks. And so we began working with people in the housing authority and people in public housing, rather. And so there were various different workshops that we ran that focused on how you really create a waterfront resiliency, how you build the capacity in public housing, how you really begin to protect yourself and begin to develop strategies for recovery and protection. In essence, what we learned is that community groups were a part of the team of first responders. And then finally, those working groups began to form and were actually sustained themselves. And we had one working on resiliency in public housing, one on innovative in finance. You'll see some photographs of that. Some folks on how do we bring smart grid technology and distributed energy technologies to communities so they could be off the grid and could function even when one doesn't have contact with energy. One of our former graduate students actually put solar collectors into his shopping cart and brought it out to Red Hook, and based on that, people were able to charge their phones and get in touch with relatives who didn't know how they were doing. And so we also had one group on emergency preparedness. Let's go to the next slide. And so, slide, please. And so the first year we worked on these areas that you see in yellow. We had a group of students that were placed with goals, good old Lower East Side. Out of their work actually came the project called the Big U. It was done by others, but they helped build the local participatory capacity of community-based organizations to engage in that project. Federal government in concert with the Dutch government. In Red Hook, we had studios in Coney Island and in the Rockaways. And in each of these areas, we had a history of working prior to that. Let's go to the next slide. And so what we had is a whole group of a suite of courses and studios that worked together. One of the innovations that we decided that was important here, since we had a multidisciplinary team of people working and really were trying to go to a transdisciplinary state, was that we felt it was important to modify the way we teach. And so we not only taught the courses, but because of some suggestions coming from Geeta Nandan and her partner Elliot Maltby, we created what we called interdisciplinary salons, where we actually, as students, presented to one another and what we were learning, so that the architects spoke to the planners spoke to the communication design people, others spoke to community organizers. We worked closely with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. We worked with the Center for Social Inclusion, which was a group that worked to create a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multiracial society. Let's go on to the next slide. Here you see pictures of some of those activities. Next slide. Here's some of the work that came out of community groups. What you're seeing here on the left, here's some more work, including some things that have been built. That space station you saw there on the lower right eventually was emergency housing, but eventually became the lifeguard stations that were put into the Rockaways. There were some super block schemes that basically looked at how do you retain water and actually develop cities that might be withstand that kind of traumatic weather events. Going, next slide. And so these were the issues we addressed. How do we build human capital and help in the community organizing efforts? We weren't community organizers, but we worked with community organizers. We understood that there were mental health and health problems that came out of this, and working with people like Mindy Fullilove, who was a physician and psychologist, and others. We actually had some input, particularly in the Rockaways, on how to address some of these issues in working with communities. And money, politics, and power, we looked at alternative financing and ran what was an innovative financing conference, which we'll see a picture of in a short while, that addressed creative finance. We worked with public housing residents to empower them so they had a greater role and a greater say in what could take place. And we also realized the enormous resource that public housing land had in terms. And we worked on a number of those other things. Each of these, as I mentioned before, were a series of workshops that we sponsored. We attracted the attention, got money from the Kresge Foundation, I believe. I may have gotten that wrong. The picture you see in the upper left here is a picture of me, a bit younger than I am now, addressing at the New York City Bar, where we co-sponsored with the Bar Association of New York and with other organizations like the Fiscal Policy Institute and others, a conference on innovative finance. The picture on the right has a picture of Mitch Silver, who's now the Parks Commissioner and a Pratt grad. Next to him on his left is a woman by the name of Maya Wiley, who will soon announce that she's running for mayor of the city of New York, but at that time was head of the Center for Social Inclusion. And sitting to my left and on the picture to my right is Eddie Batista, who you also see in the head of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And we actually sponsored with NEJA and with the Center for Social Inclusion a series of panels that took place in 4 of the 5 boroughs that discussed issues that came out of Superstorm Sandy. The 5th borough, we actually, Staten Island, actually had a major event that we co-sponsored with community groups there and the Staten Island Community College. Here are some additional pictures of some of the participants. We worked with youth. In that picture there, you see a model of the rail line that runs through the Rockaways, and a desire to develop something called the Underway, and working with the placemaking students and David Burney. Over time, we've actually gone out there and have demonstrated and the development of some public space. We work with the Rockaway. On to the next slide. Lionel, next slide. I wish I can control this. Next slide, please. Do you hear me? Lionel, next slide.
I
Okay.
think you're breaking up, Ron.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope people are hearing me. Let's go to the next slide. This is some of the hurry plan training and other activities. Then finally, we engaged in international exchanges. This is a picture of a number of the community-based organizations that joined us, and students from 4 of the neighborhoods of New York City, Pratt students, community representatives, 1 or 2 government officials, and a couple of advocacy groups that traveled to Rotterdam and actually met with the people at the Rotterdam Design and Manufacturing Center and others, looking at how to address some of the problems that we were facing in New York. How do you manage water, but manage water and build resilient? And one of the things we found that was of critical need was that in every community we were working in, there were huge disparities in income, disparities in wealth. And we were looking at how do we really bridge that as part of the recovery, because the injustices should not be forgotten when one is looking at recovery. And out of that, next slide. Am I still breaking up? Lionel, next slide, please.
You should be on.
Out of that came this idea of the resilience, a resilience education, training and innovation and incubation program, something we called READY. And 2 or 3 of our students, Chris Johnson, Brooke Mayer, Rebecca Crimmins, all came up with the idea that if we created this entity in Red Hook, it could bridge those new innovators who would move into the neighborhood, and perhaps we could begin to address the issue of poverty and disparities. And out of that, the idea of this entity called READY was born. And with that, that was seeded, and I would like to turn this over to Geeta Nandan, because she is one of the co-founders of this entity, which has been functioning now since 2013 or 2014, and hopefully will be launched a little bit behind the schedule you see in this chart, but has been launched and is now working in Red Hook. So I'll turn it over to Geeta, and we can go from there.
Thanks, Ron. That was really fabulous. And so I think everybody has a really good foundation now of sort of where RAMP 1.0 started. And the Ready Center is a really great example of how, the work that is in the studio can really be brought to life on the ground in communities that we're working with over time. And the Ready Center is alive. It's very active, especially in the COVID times. It's actually turned a corner and been able to do a whole mass distribution that's nationwide. And we're working now fairly locally in Red Hook, having a serious impact with local communities. We're about to build out a barge with some of our Pratt alumni, which I think is really fabulous. Sam and Ishel from the GCP department are working to build this barge out that will be a farming garden outdoor classroom actually for local schools. And so it's really nice to be able to see this connection that happens on the ground. And so thanks, Lionel. I'm going to talk about the Delta Cities Coastal Resilience Studio, which is an outgrowth of RAMP 1.0. And I feel like the Delta Cities Coastal Resilience Studio, what it does is it takes everything that RAMP was or is, the philosophical tenets of it, and creates an atmosphere within a studio setting of all of those methods that we're trying to achieve. And so we have worked in a number of different communities. If you can go to the next slide. So as Ron had stated, as part of the RAMP mission, which is a very serious core mission of the Delta Cities Coastal Resilience Studio, is working with frontline communities and communities that are environmental justice communities and communities that will be heavily impacted by sea level rise. These are 2 maps that are from the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance that shows people of color and levels of poverty overlaid with the 100-year floodplain. And as you can see, a lot of these communities are the ones that are on the front line in the lowest lying neighborhoods of our city. So they are the ones that will be the most impacted, and they're the ones that really need support in terms of determining their future. And so Delta City's Coastal Resilience Studio has been working over the past 5 years across the 5 boroughs, from Red Hook at a sort of smaller scale community to where we are today, which is Jamaica Bay, and we will actually be spending 2 years in Jamaica Bay. One is specifically in the Rockaways, and to this year we've taken a much broader vision, and we're looking at the entire region as a whole, which I think is interesting. The scales of our work have really changed also over time, from a fairly small knit community to this very broad regional scale. Next. So we have a community partner in each and every studio, and that's a really critical key component. We actually work with the community partner during the summer months to form and create the overall agenda of the studio. The idea is that the studio is not working in a vacuum, but is working in tandem with the community and a community's needs, and engaging with the work that they're already doing on the ground. So the idea of the studio is, while there's sort of an academic bent to it, and there's, you know, a world of trying to be visionary, there's also a reality of how can we support the communities and the work that they're doing, and give them material and give them sort of support in the actions that they're taking on the ground in relationship to not only climate change, but to what their priorities might be. Right? And so climate change has a whole host of impacts, whether it be heat island effect, stormwater management, poverty, right? You know, lack of transportation. So there are lots of overlaps with other issues. So we work together to find out what their priorities are. So last year, as I said, we worked in the Rockaways with RISE, which is formerly the Rockaway Waterfront Alliance. The Rockaways is a coastal barrier island that is incredibly vulnerable, and they have daylight flooding, and they will really be one of the first communities impacted overall across the 5 boroughs. Next. So we, as a group, including RISE, they wanted an in-person workshop exhibit within their house, their home, which is a beautiful firehouse in Edgemere. And so the end result of the studio, or like, you know, the focus of the studio, was to create this exhibit. And this exhibit was then attended not only by our studio, but by invited community members, youth advocates, and they kept the materials and they are using them to host further discussions around the issues that we tackled. In this studio, one of the big issues was addressing managed retreat. And so amongst other larger topics, managed retreat was one of the core topics that the studio engaged with, and one of our students actually was doing her thesis work, Erica Asanoff, and she has a very strong proposal, I think, that won an award through Pratt, regarding how do you engage community in those very complicated discussions. I show these images not to talk about them specifically, but more while the studio engages in very hyper-local community-based solutions, there are themes that come up, and these themes that have come up across all 5 boroughs, whether it be energy independence, whether it be sea level rise and addressing flooding, whether it be food and food access and independence and retreat. These are all themes that are similar across all of these communities that we're dealing with. And like I said, they manifest themselves differently. So as part of what came out of RAMP is a very core part of the studio. So the studio is co-taught by myself and Lionel, and Tom Jost had been one of my co-teachers, and Lita Aljavar is one of my co-teachers at this moment, and Zara Kuz, who is on this presentation. It runs the undergraduate architecture class that is integrated with our studio, which is a very fascinating process. So we have a graduate level program integrated with undergraduates, and actually it's incredibly successful. And there are challenges, and we can talk about the challenges in terms of timing, and it's much more of a structural challenge, I would say, than an intellectual challenge. And our students learn from hers, and her students learn from ours. And we have these very rich conversations that deal with both urban planning and architecture and the built environment around climate change. So there is always integrated planning. We love to do these sessions in person. These days we're doing them on Zoom, but there's a lot of rich exchange that happens. And I think that that's really important as a part of the process, that no one in the real world is designing in a vacuum, especially when you're put out there in the professional world. And so it's very important to be able to work with other professions in the room. You know, and our studio is an integrated studio alone. We have every subject matter represented within GCPE: historic preservation, planners, sustainability experts, architects, urban designers, all within one roof. And so there is a very rich, detailed variety of work that comes out of it. Next. So another, can you actually go to the next slide? I'll just skip that one. Yeah, so in 2018, we worked in Newtown Creek, and we worked with the Newtown Creek Alliance, another very vulnerable location. This had a very different set of needs in terms of it being an industrial business district, much more so than a residential district. So we had to sort of really look at a different, through a different lens. Before Jamaica Bay, we really focused on what's called the SMIAs, or the significant maritime industrial areas, and Newtown Creek being one of them. And so we did have a focus on industrial and business situations. One of our core tenets of the studio is to understand what New York City will look like in 100 years, and to try and be realistic about what needs to happen today and how these solutions are going to manifest themselves in the present and in the next 5 to 10 years. But what we as planners and humanists, how do we want to envision and work with New York City? What will New York City look like in 100 years, and how do we get there? You can go to the next slide. Yeah, next. So the first studio we worked in was in Red Hook. And like I said, this is one of the smaller communities, but yet once again, incredibly vulnerable in terms of the flood maps in 100 years. It was really impacted by Superstorm Sandy in 2012, and was part of our ramp workshopping, and then became one of our studios. Go to the next slide, please. So I think one of the important aspects of this studio was how we worked with the community members. And I was a leader and the community member in the community as well. The community was struggling with how to work with city and state officials at the mayor's office and at the governor's office of storm recovery in terms of trying to advocate for flood protection, storm water management, and looking at how the future might unfold in terms of that. So the studio worked with local organizations and RHI's local leaders to give them a vision and give them some thoughts and ideas that then they could use as material. So these projects, this is just one of 4 projects that got developed, have sort of come up over and over again in various different discussions and have been used by the community at different points to help the community talk about both what their future looks like and how they advocate for flood protection. So that to me is a really core benefit of the studio and a core aspect of how we are able to bring this sort of design process to the communities working on the ground. And then here for Red Hook are some of the undergraduate proposals. And this represents a great set of posters because the architecture students and the GCPE students worked very closely in the studio together, and all of the deliverables were highly integrated between the architectural proposals and the design. So here we have a design for an elevated flood protection system that to me is actually one of the better proposals that has been out there. And I have seen a lot of proposals. Right now the city is, you know, claiming to raise our streets or raise Red Hook streets, you know, by maybe 12 inches along some of these locations, and that this is a real integrated flood proposal that works with architecture, that works with transportation, that creates what's called a resilient improvement district. And that RID actually has gotten some legs to it. And James, who worked on that project, now works in the mayor's office and is trying, or in the city council, and is trying to push some of these ideas. So hopefully, you know, some of these ideas that foster themselves begin to take shape and have longer legs. And with that, I will turn it over to Zara to talk about the undergraduate architecture integration.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you. So I have been blessed with joining the RAMP team from very early days and continue to collaborate through when RAMP initiative ended and the Delta cities began. Are actually the undergrad and graduate studios collaboration were intensified. We worked off of one workbook with the same client at different times, but that's what Gita referred to as the technical challenges. Indeed, between 5 and 6:30 was the only overlapping time where we could technically bring both of our student groups together and think tank and let them engage. Working with community organizations, it is an incredible opportunity to merge empirical experience with professional disciplines. And it also gives the students the urgency to respond to the threats, climate change. It's a very complex problem, and it is a great opportunity to discuss in an interdisciplinary platform from planners, urban placemakers, and architects at the same table, sitting side by side. So my group of students, this is a team of 2. They actually, this is a continuation from the board before. They looked at the proposals by the SIRR, those plans suggest a thin yellow line, and they took one of those proposals and then invested really how that integrated flood protection system manifests itself all the way from the recreational facility close to Gowanus all the way to a higher ground along the Beard Street. And these are the series of plans. It ends, that integrated flood protection system ends in a trade school. That was their proposal for this community specifically, because the demographic analysis showcased that there were youth, high school dropouts, and we wanted to regain them for the society and engage them into the workforce. So there is this, on the lower right-hand side is the trade school that is also the integrated flood protection system on the waterfront. Next slide, please, Lionel. Thank you. Another group in Red Hook, they too listed all the community capitals, assets, threats, and actually made a master plan for every single aspect, because we always looked at the challenge through the lenses of environment, economy, ecology, and culture. In this case, they thought developing the hook on Red Hook into a mixed-use development would fund the construction of the very elaborate integrated flood protection system and protect the entire neighborhood with that. Here is the housing, commercial, and other public facilities all integrated into one big master plan. Thank you. Lionel? As we said before, the Delta cities focused on significant maritime industrial areas, and the following year we were in Hunts Point. Hunts Point is an incredible place. It is disconnected, it has connectivity issues, it has all the food distribution center, and hence the truck traffic. I believe 15,000 trucks every day come in and out. And to the left are the analyses for opportunity and threat map, and to the right is again a list of proposals, but the climax was the eco park. The students had met the point, which is the community organization that very much has an art program for the youth. This one suggests a science program for the youth, as it takes up all the waste from the food distribution center and into anaerobic digesters and turn them into energy and light up the whole neighborhood. Thank you. Research. Well, as also Gita mentioned, all aspects of water was part of our investigation, and Jamie Stein and I were the primary investigators. We looked at the challenges when it rains, it pollutes. We chose the Red Hook sewer shed as our destination. It's clearly, you can see the shape, it's very arbitrary. Unlike watersheds, sewer sheds are very arbitrary. How did we get here is also an indication by these map. The entire waterfront of New York City is shaped and reshaped and reclaimed land, and it is very low lying, and there is no absorption. Thank you. Lionel? Yes, and institutional fragmentation. I mean, it is difficult to address such challenges through smaller geographical areas. So we collected the data, as you see, the district, assembly districts, neighborhoods, community board districts. None of the borders align, which makes it harder to address because community boards are actually relatively large. Yeah, the analysis was based on data, also physical data, because we had no access to the below ground information. So everything that we were trying to address in this sewer shed was above ground. So we looked at the building typology and realized that actually the building typology with topography showed that more than 40% was the donut, the townhouses in Red Hook. Climate data and quantifying the problem. You can move faster, Lionel. And we developed our own methodology trying to find the gap, what the DEP was trying to do and what the European standards were. And this was the hybrid as we came out, and all the red numbers were the gap again. And we had a very interdisciplinary team. We were 7, and with our consultants and interns, we had a lively debate, and it was funded by New York Community Trust and ended in 2017. RAMP 2.0. I'm very happy that Ron is here. RAMP 2.0, we were trying to expand the reach. Pratt Institute has many schools and many departments and programs, and RAMP was, even though we had bridged across the campus. The Delta Cities predominantly was an activity within the School of Architecture. The goal was to expand and become more inclusive and put together a infrastructure so that many could engage in these community collaborations and experiential learning and develop an understanding for on-the-ground needs. It will build upon the success of RAMP and it will develop the Pratt faculty and students' capacity. We promised in our letter of intent that we will build a knowledge bank and archive that will be accessible to everybody. We will always work with community organizations and learn and develop a curriculum based on that reciprocal relationship with them, their empirical experience and our professional disciplines coming together. The interdisciplinary curriculum, indeed, climate change is a very complex phenomena, and right now we are going through concurrent crises, and they all relate somehow to climate change. And the response is interdisciplinary and complex. We started as a core team, we started making a mind map and listed the structures of climate change and what contributes to it, what needs to be addressed, all the way from social to geophysical, and also examine them, how many lenses or how many categories do they really cross, and looked at the curriculum as it is. The Pratt Sustainability Center had already a list of curriculum that they were working with, and that was the foundation. But Dwayne and I looked at the websites and other data that we had access to, and developed this draft of a course buffet, as Dwayne calls it. And that is going to be our worksheet or for going forward to vet these courses and engage the faculty and examine the alignments and take it to the next level to listing, making hybrid courses perhaps, or the advantage of looking at the existing courses is that they're already approved and running. We thought that it would be less bureaucracy and faster to turn them into a wealth of information for everybody at Pratt Institute.
Zara, can I just step back a little bit to the three components so that you can go over them again, because that's going to be critical to the... Do you want to speak a little bit about the three pieces of...
Yes, of course. The library of completed Pratt research and experience, it will be, we have partnered with Pratt Center as well as with the Pratt Sustainability Center as well as Savvy, that and some of the elements will be hosted by them, by Savvy, for example, the data that they are providing us with maps, interactive maps, where we are active. And this complete library will be accessible to campus-wide Pratt community as well as beyond. So we are very interested in bridging academia with also city agencies as well as NGOs and other institutions where we may need collaboration with, especially in life sciences. Community leaders, we have already, I mean, this has at Pratt, through Pratt Center, through Ron Schiffman, has a 50-year history. We have community partners and we have been working with them. And as a matter of fact, the community relationships will also be instrumental in our promise for curriculum development. We have thus far named 2 that will collaborate with the curriculum committee, and we will learn also from them how they are engaging their communities and what we can take from them in order to develop our own approach and intensify our reach. Lionel, please. Yeah. Why join now? And it couldn't be more urgent. As a matter of fact, the maps that the conversation started with, that environmental justice agency shares, is very telling. The vulnerable coastal areas are the same as the social injustice where communities, underserved communities reside. So the frontline communities are at the brunt of the climate change impacts. And that is the greatest urgency for RAMP 2.0 to accelerate the process and become more inclusive and build capacity for civic engagement and climate curriculum at Pratt Institute. Lionel, do you want to join me in this conversation?
I am struggling with the slides for once. Sorry, everybody, for the slightly herky-jerky motions. And I think, you know, why now it goes beyond just climate change. All of these intersecting crises, including COVID, including the renewed calls for racial and socioeconomic justice, they intersect. And there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that needs to be done. And it extends even beyond Pratt. And I'm glad that there are some people from outside of Pratt's gates that are here. And I think that this is really a call for collaboration. But, you know, before we get to that, you know, it's also just a call for us to internally at Pratt align our work to our missions, right, to our strategic plan. And this is why RAMP 2.0 has been funded to be seated towards that goal. And it's also about expanding our impact on our community engagement work in new and more appropriate ways for those novel times of COVID, right? So what I want to do, if I can actually stop sharing. Thank you all for bearing with the herky-jerkiness of it all. Aishwarya, she's over here, graduate assistant extraordinaire. She's going to share with you the app called Milanote. If you didn't receive the link to the app and sign up for it, it's a free app. It's being used a lot at Pratt for online collaboration. We're going to be doing a couple breakout rooms after the Q&A, so please sign up for an account, and we'll be sharing 3 boards for you to share your ideas and how you hope to collaborate, or your questions about how to engage with us in the future now or going forward. So please sign up for that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, we'll take a couple of questions. So if you're ready to ask questions on the chat, Aish, if you want to call out the questions, and please tell us who it's for,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll get some answers.
Sure.
So this is a Q&A period. Any questions on the past work, on the transition to the Delta cities, or the new call for action for RAMP 2.0? I'm gonna just put up the 3 components of RAMP 2.0 for everybody to see. Feel free to speak out too. It's a small group, so. No questions? Do the panelists have anything else they want to add at this time?
So Eve asks, how did you connect with the community organizations? Did they find you or did you find them? I think this is more general.
Who is the question?
I think this is just to the whole panel.
Yeah, I mean, we often are sort of talking to various different community groups just in general over time. And so we sort of have a running mental list and a little list of people that are interested in working with us or people that have pitched projects to us. And then sometimes it's about location and then looking at a specific location and then thinking about who might be an appropriate community organization to work with. You know, obviously those community organizations are always doing something related to climate change on the ground. And we try to specifically partner with people doing environmental justice work related to climate change. But I would say it's a little bit of back and forth and you know, it really depends. But we do have like a little list of groups or organizations. And then we try to not do the same organization 2 years in a row. This year is a little bit different. Working with RISE, we did work with RISE last year, but this year we're working with RISE and the Science and Resiliency Institute of Jamaica Bay. And we are much more closely working with the Shore Corps, which is their youth engagement program, whereas last year was much more about RISE in general. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
There's one more question here.
Yeah, so I think another question is lauding you for your great work, and what community capacity building projects are most replicable across the city of New York?
Can you repeat the question, Ashwarya, please?
Yeah. What community capacity building projects are most replicable across New York City? Like, that's the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's like a one shoe fits all solution across all of New York City. But what I have found with these local climate groups or activist groups is they need support in terms of just putting their thoughts and ideas to paper and creating materials and stuff that they can use to talk about the issues that they want to talk about. In addition to just thinking through, you know, sort of the planning. That's what we found with Hunts Point. Hunts Point had a very large coalition of organizations already working on a very sincere sustainability plan, and they had a lot of materials at hand, but they needed help sort of like putting it all together into a more cohesive kind of thought process. So I don't really think that we have never done the same thing twice, which is kind of interesting. And especially in terms of the engagement that we do with the community or that we do side by side. Sometimes it's workshops, sometimes it's a, you know, series of posters, sometimes it really changes every year.
But also we always presented to the community organizations that we worked with. So they are aware of our work. They they do participate in midterm and final, and that conversation is helpful. Maybe that's something that a project has that they haven't thought about.
Yeah, a follow-up question to that would be, does that entail the same community design charrette that you guys conduct, or is it more informal?
The design charrette that we do is usually in-house between our students, but I have to say we do have the community organizations. So Zara and I and Lionel, we work with the community organization all summer, and it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of prep work, but the prep work is really critical to the studio. So that way we make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're ready for what's going to happen during the fall semester. And then we create sort of a schedule of when they will be involved, and then they are involved at different touch points throughout the term. And it's important that they're involved, you know, even more than like 2 or 3 times. And then they are accessible with our students at various different points when the students feel like they have extra questions.
I would add a couple of things. Actually, I'll let Ron add first. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, one of the things is that there are other studios that the Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment operate, as well as other programs at Pratt. And one of the things we try to do is to have a continuous and sustained relationship with many of the organizations. One of the principles we try to establish in the Pratt Graduate Center and even at the Pratt Center is we don't fly in and fly out of communities. We actually develop ongoing working relationships. We have a very close working relationship with a variety of networks in New York City. One of the most important ones is the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, where we have interns working there through an internship program, funding to sustain some of this, but it's something that we do. Our studios sometimes seed activities like the Ready Project in Red Hook, and we stay committed to it both as faculty and as individuals, and some graduate students that are involved in thesis work or other activities. We had a studio working in Sunset Park that generated a great number of ideas, and now have a grant that is working with them on health and the environmental issues there. A group of faculty formed a collective, and they've been working with Sunset Park, both faculty and others outside of Pratt, of primarily women that have been working on a collective that has actually developed a program with Uprose in Sunset Park on what will be a major green resilience industrial district. We're now advocating, a number of us, that the city reject an existing zoning proposal in lieu of the changes that are coming out of COVID. So there's enormous other kinds of ongoing relationships, and we try to make sure that these are sustained, that we're not like other universities that come in and exploit the community, but we try to give back to a great extent. And part of that is a sustained relationship with those neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would add to that keeping in mind that GCP is a very small program, and while we have great allies like Zara, part of the point of RAMP 2.0 is to really expand that network, to make sure that we expand our capacity to help, right? To assist in these multitude of ways, and to really maintain that long-term engagement, because it's more critical than ever, right? And then the other, and that's also reflected in trying to work through the curriculum development before the class starts, right? Go ahead, Ron. You raise your hand again.
Yeah, one point is that we're working for the leadership in those neighborhoods. If they don't want us, they don't ask us. But the real issue is how does a group that's university based work with communities that respects the leadership within those communities? And that's something that we have over the years have honed our chair, Eve Barron, has been an expert at really developing that and putting it into the curriculum. And it's part of really addressing, some of the issues of systemic racism and a commitment to building the capacity of the people that we work with to take on those leadership roles as well. And so our engagement is not only one of student activity, but it's also one that really helps build a cadre of community-based organizations that are part of a movement to bring about social and economic and racial justice in the city.
Yeah, and I would say that the engagement portion of the studios doesn't always come out as intended, right? There are capacity issues, there are scheduling issues, as were pointed out. And I don't know if Dwayne wants to speak as having taken one of the last Delta City studio on this in his own experience. But we try as much as possible to maintain that long-term relationship, but also so that we have a basis of analysis if something does happen and we can't really engage to the extent that we want to within a semester. I think it's part of having that long-term process. Meta has a couple of questions, and then Dwayne has a question. I think we should just stick with questions unless we want to break into the breakout rooms and the collaboration, because it's a small group. What do you all think?
Yeah, I think we should stay as one group and not break. It is also beneficial to all of us to hear all the questions and all the responses.
Yeah,
on
that.
Go ahead, Gita.
Sorry, on that note, we're hoping that this part of this exercise in this presentation is to be able to understand and hear from other people across campus. I'm really excited. For me, working in collaboration with Zara, architecture, urban planning, historic preservation, it creates a really rich environment. But ideally, for climate change on Pratt's campus, there's just so much more we can do as an interdisciplinary model. And so I would love to hear from folks that are on the Zoom to chime in and share what you're working on, what you're interested in, how you might see collaborating. And collaboration could be very simple, and we can keep it, as manageable as possible, or we could try and go deep. I think even just trying to think about what you guys are working on and how we might create those connections will, it would just be a great starting point. I'm super excited to hear that.
And maybe that's a segue where maybe Meta can ask her question and give her some opinions on her question as far as collaboration within the School of Architecture and across, and opportunities and challenges. But I just want to note that we will be sending around a Google form to begin that engagement process in a more formalized manner, which was going to be a follow-up to the workshop anyway. Meta, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question and maybe speak a little bit to Gita's query?
Sure. I was actually one of the studio teachers that participated in RAMP, the first RAMP. And I think this is an incredible model. Now, I am currently a member of the School of Architecture Curriculum Committee, and we are looking into making cross-disciplinary coursework and coursework with community partners that is a little bit more long-term than a single semester into something that is easier, because a lot of the same people have been doing the same studios, right? Gita and Zara and you and so forth. And my thought is, how can we get other faculty members who've never been involved in this? They're
welcome.
I know, but they're welcome, but they don't know how. And there are institutional barriers, such as the 15-week semester. And so I feel a little bit of work has to be done to make it easier and to publicize it and to talk to the chairs so that we see more faculty members finding it easy to, engage in this. And I just wanted to hear your ideas. I know that this has been on your mind. This is the part that you want to do. So I'd love to hear from you what needs to be done. What are the obstacles and how can we overcome them?
Meta, can I answer to this? Can I
Yes.
answer to this? Okay, thank you. So the other day you said something in a completely different context, And I said, oh yeah, that's exactly how I think also, like sustainability courses and issues and goals. And you said not everything that is spoken and done for sustainability really contributes to sustainability. And the same way here, I was going to talk perhaps a little bit my own experience as an architect. I mean, when you're working on the ground with community organizations, with their constituents, their student body, there is an urgency and realism and timeline to the project that not everybody is interested in addressing. So there has to be this reciprocal interest also from the faculty member to commit to work with these realities rather than with hyper realities. And clearly the quality of design is not an issue, because I really believe that it is a part of the equity that they have access. The communities should have access to excellent design. That is definitely supportive of the RAMP philosophy. But and that's why we are here. We want to open it up. We want to make it inclusive. We want other people to contribute. And sometimes there are technical difficulties, like Gita and I have been juggling for that 1 hour of overlap. But research can be done. Workshops can be done. Workshops in 3 days. Yes. There are other opportunities.
I think we do want to open it up, and the more the better. But at the same time, there has to be a vetting process to make sure that the faculty are committed to the social and goals of that community. So they're working in tandem. And also we have to be sensitive to the fact that we don't want people popping in and popping out. So there has to be some continuity. It's not so simple, but it's important to do, because you need different ideas, you need different people, and the more we can expose to working this way, the better. But at the same time, we have to be careful, because you want to make sure that the community is not exploited, but assisted.
Right. But I hear something different from Meta's question, and it makes me think about like, we've never thought about this before. But Meta, tell me if I'm wrong, but would like a RAMP 2.0 or like an expansion of Delta Cities like workbook, like not work, but like a guide, or like this is the, like I feel like we don't actually have a like really clear step-by-step process that says like, first we do this and then we do this, and if you're willing to do 3 summer meetings to get it, if you're, well, I'm very serious, like like every time somebody wants to join this process, we don't want to have to do a 2-hour meeting like this, right? So like, actually, I think being able to document this in a way that allows for entry and allows for somebody to take it home, open up a PDF and be like, oh, I get it. Like, maybe I will do this in 2021. Like, is that sort of something that you think might be a useful tool?
Yes, and I also think that you can then present it to, the GAUD curriculum committee and the coordinators. You can talk to more, I mean, there's many faculty members in the undergraduate program that, that could take this on. And the school is really, the direction is equity and justice, going forward. And I feel that the entire curriculum committee is looking for ways to facilitate. And I also feel that there are structural obstacles for studios of different departments. And I would like you to identify what the obstacles are, so that, the administration and the curriculum committee can address them specifically. So, because I feel a lot of people really would like to do it, but and they see the benefits, and now, you know, they're part, you know, they hear all about it, but they feel like it's always the same people. And I like the idea of potentially, because it's always a partnership, right? Of having one partner that's experienced and another partner that's new. So that builds a new generation, a new kind of, right?
Well, and
and that way there is, you know, a kind of the experience of having worked multiple times with communities like I have, and many others of you have, would then be, you know, that kind of knowledge of how you interact with the community and what it means to, you know, collaborate in this context, would then be, you know, disseminated much further.
Right.
A quick response to, and I wrote some of this in the chat, but I think the three components of RAM 2.0 are striking to kind of create the framework to be able to have these discussions and support some additional piloting and expansion of existing projects. I think Ron brings up a good point in that maybe one of the actual next steps is thinking of what are our guidelines for engagement. And I think that's part of the benefit of having community partners in this curriculum development, right? But I think we're building together with the Department of Sustainability coordinators and their sustainability coursework catalog, we're building places for connection, right? And I think we need to have more of these forums to manifest those places of connection and build towards more interdisciplinary iterations of this work, right? But there will be challenges to consolidating that under one umbrella. And I think having a flexibility of having this database, the knowledge bank that can be drawn upon so that we're not starting from scratch each semester, right? Or a professor can take something and move it forward. Those are great starting blocks, but I do think that that partnership with people who have experience with community-based work could be one step towards creating those guidelines of engagement. But I don't know if Ron has other suggestions on how that could be achieved as we expand this network.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I have been part of, you know, I'm a departmental sustainability coordinator for the graduate architecture program. So I've been part of creating lists of sustainability related courses. And to me, that is not sufficient. In my mind, what really needs to be done is, you know, models need to be formed to see which courses best match other ones from a time perspective and from an ideological perspective, because when students walk into the graduate office, let's say, and say, what seminar should I take? You know, I would love to have like a RAMP 2.0 track where you could choose X elective and X studio and make it a 2 or 3 semester experience, right? But that needs to be somehow formulated ahead of time so that students can really sign up for something.
Yeah, Meta, that's a great idea. That is probably where we want to go. Right. We are not there yet. It takes initiatives to become center. It takes years. And I mean, we have experience, and as Lionel said, that I was going to also bring it up, some of the archive and knowledge bank will respond to your question about how do we know what is happening in these studios, and the other one is really we are aiming, the goal is to go there, to develop a component that resides within the institutes, Pratt Institute, and that has a very heavy civic engagement arm.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, I think Dwayne's first question from a while back is maybe people with guests and all of us panelists can answer is, what are specific programs outside the School of Architecture that you see as having high potential for collaboration in this interdisciplinary work? Just to build on Meta's query. Maybe Frank, if you want to start taking this and speak about industrial design and how you might see that connection, that could be a good way to start.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. It was really great to learn about your work. And for me as an industrial designer, I think of things on a much smaller scale. So it really is exciting and helpful to kind of expand and think about how industrial designers could be integrated into these larger projects. Industrial designers are really like quick problem solvers. I see as like, and a lot of the things that you said stimulated ideas for me of things that would get them excited. And I think about, when somebody's in a crisis and how they have to deal with that crisis, what are the tools that they need to survive and to deal with it. And I think industrial designers are so good at thinking about that. I think the other thing, they're really excited to work in the community. I taught a class many years ago with the Red Hook Community Farm as a partner and with community gardens. And the goal of the class was to design a rainwater collection system for them. And they got to visit all these community gardens. We worked with the Water Resources Group, part of the New York City government, and it just opened their eyes to so many things that they hadn't thought of before. So I think they need to get involved in field work. They need to get out and they need to see the complexities of all of these things, because I think sometimes they see things on like materials and smaller scale and they just need to really expand. So I'm excited about this. I think for me, the opportunities could be within the studios at Pratt, because there's undergraduate, junior and senior studios, but there's also a graduate program. There are graduate thesis programs. I think the ideas that people brought up about workshops and smaller scale or shorter things are great. The summer is also another great time for students to be looking for more in-depth projects. So I just think there's a lot of opportunities, and I think there are opportunities that we've had with other departments within the School of Design, doing partnerships with, say, communications design and or interior design with industrial design. So there's some precedents for some of these collaborations, and I think it'd be really exciting. So thanks for sharing everything, and hopefully we'll be able to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Frank, I want to just chime in. Like a great example, Frank, is I'm working on a floating gardens project, and actually this Jay, I don't remember her last name, but she's in the industrial design department, and she was working very closely with us on it. And it was really a fascinating collaboration, and we were almost in the time of COVID, and so we didn't end up doing the prototyping, but there was all this materiality that she brought to the table, which was just, and so my partner's a landscape architect, I'm the architect. It was really rich experience. And that's when I was like, we should be working with fashion and industrial design and like, and even communication. Like it just was, I just feel like when you look at the world of climate change, like it's a built environment made out of materials, right? And those materials need to be addressed because they are resource rich and they are greenhouse gas emission creators, right? And so looking at like a not only zero carbon concrete, but a net positive concrete, for instance, like how do we as policymakers even work with your industrial designers to be able to figure out how that might happen? So I feel like there's a lot of, to me, like scale is so meaningful and so meaningless, right? It's like working at scale can just translate so easily between all these different thinkers. And I just get so jazzed about it. It's really.
I would like to add to
what Gita is saying and what Frank raised, I think is really exciting because I think it's really that kind of interaction that will benefit both us academically for the role that we must play with our students and really help the communities that we're working with. And I have a friend who's an industrial designer from Italy, Ezio Manzini, who actually talks about the design process as being a process for solving intractable problems. And I think that's what we all bring to the table. And so I really think we should really pursue how we build those linkages.
May I add to the industrial?
Basically working on some of these issues. I think we should follow them up.
Yeah, Frank, I want to add also, because you asked what are the opportunities. I was working with RISE, RWA. They have a huge education group and program in place. And the founder director asked me, well, can you do a summer studio, and we need economic development for this neighborhood, and we could design food carts and surfboard sheds and bicycle racks. And so it was a little bit at the last minute request, and I couldn't organize sponsors who would donate material, but we designed it anyhow. That would have been a perfect opportunity, not only to design, but build, because those are small items. And especially if you had sponsored sponsors who would donate material and donate whatever, and her students and the school and our students could do that over a period of months. Yes, this is why we are here. We are trying to organize and pave the path for a bit more substantial collaboration and also realization, implementable, actionable solution to their need.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great. So I'm gonna let Aish, who's been working really hard in trying to set up all of these workshop methodologies that we'll use in the future, I'm gonna let her have the last question because she's asked a couple already and she's helped us put this together. So Aish, if you wanna send us off with your last question, and we'll try to answer as best as we can.
Sure. So, so I studied with Ron a couple of semesters ago, and it was sustainable communities. And one thing I understood gleaned from the whole process was the need to be hypersensitive and less pedantic, which I find particularly hard to do because I'm still, I'm getting my degree and at Pratt. So when you do talk about community engagement for like a project as important as RAMP, how would you say the steps that we need to take as members of academic institutions can be?
Are you addressing that to me?
Yeah.
Well, I think the most important thing is to be sensitive to the people that you're working with and to begin to listen to them and learn from them. I, for one, think, Gita's proposal for coming up with a template or a workbook is really a very important one. But it's a kind of workbook that has to emphasize that you have to learn to read the community that you're working in, because different communities have different personalities, ways of engaging themselves and engaging their neighbors. And I think it's important to begin at that level of sensitivity. So, there's no formula here. It's learning to listen. It's learning to really be humble. Look for the asset base in the community that you can build upon, rather than just the problems that depress everybody. And what you really want to do is build on that. And it's hard work, but quite frankly, it's very enjoyable. It's very energizing. And the more you engage in it, the more you'll become able to do it with ease. But I do think it's critically important to learn to listen.
And if I may add one more component to this, having been given the chance to collaborate with community organizations, and sometimes over and over, you make friendships, of course. And they ask me, not just me, but as a Pratt representative, they said, we work with other schools too, but you guys respond to us and we don't feel heard by others. So I think that we had great teachers in Ron to spearhead this initiative to begin with. And we learned how to listen, and they really want to be heard. Yeah, that's quite important going forward. to keep.
Yeah.
So, Geeta just left, but Ira brought something up about involving youth in affected communities as we did with Ramp 1. I think that's something that a lot of the work that is done with these community organizations, we try to do that, right? And actually,
Yes.
this semester in Delta Cities, the students will be working directly with RISE's ShoreCore youth in developing a community engagement methodology that then the ShoreCore youth who are in middle and high school can take and bring around to different communities to understand how to better fund and develop resiliency projects, because there have been such a wave after wave of projects that have been proposed since Sandy around all communities in Jamaica Bay. And so this engagement is really about capacity building on both ends, learning from the community and helping capacitate the community to do their own engagement, to do their own work. And I think the youth that are part of these programs and a lot of these community organizations are really key in that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, they are our future. They are our capital too. Those young people at RISE are so inspiring. They enroll themselves in these programs to learn more about their own environment. And that's great. Great. They are our future, really. So giving back to that community is an opportunity for us. Yeah.
So thank you, Zara. So I want to just, keeping in mind that we're a little bit over time, I just want to thank everybody for coming and invite you to continue to collaborate with us. If we didn't get your email for whatever reason in the registration process, if you could please add it to the chat, we'll make sure to reach out to you to keep you collaborating with us. Although I think we know most everybody here. And I really, to echo what Zara was saying, this is really a long-term project, but it's something that we hope that we can begin to break down some of these silos and barriers, not just within Pratt, not just between different institutions, but between communities and institutions in ways that are ever more meaningful and more necessary, right? So unless Ron has parting words of his own, I just want to thank everybody and welcome you to the RAM 2.0 team.
Thank you. Yes.